There is one week in human history that changed the world, and it is the week leading up to what we know as Easter. It is a week full of passion, so it's called Passion Week. It is a week that is completely set apart, and so it is called Holy Week. On the first day of that week, on Palm Sunday. It's called Palm Sunday because Jesus rode into the city of Jerusalem and they were waving palm branches. They were receiving him as the Messiah. They were recognizing him as their king. He comes riding in on Palm Sunday into the city of Jerusalem, and he's riding in on a donkey. This was to fulfill the prophecy in Zechariah. Zechariah 9:9 says, "Behold, your king is coming, full of righteousness, coming with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey." The gospel accounts tell us that Jesus came riding in on a donkey. The people are shouting, "Hosanna." We say Hosanna in English. Really, it's two Hebrew words, Yasha and Anna. Yasha meaning to save or to deliver, and Anna meaning it's a plea, it's a request. And so it's a plea for salvation. They are saying, "Save us." They are recognizing that Jesus is a Savior. He's not only a Savior, he is the Savior. The Pharisees don't like what is happening, and so they tell Jesus, they say, "Rebuke the people, stop them from saying what they're saying." Well, Jesus responds to the Pharisees and he says, "If they don't worship me, then the rocks themselves would cry out." Jesus gets into the city of Jerusalem and he heads straight to the temple, because you see, Jesus is not only king, but he is also priest. And so on Monday of that week, that Holy Week, Jesus goes to the temple and he goes to cleanse the temple. And while he's on his way to the temple, the Gospels tell us that he saw a fig tree that had leaves, but it didn't have any fruit. So it had some outward form, it had the appearance, it had the look, but it didn't have the reality. It had the appearance of religion, but not the inward reality. It was an object lesson of what was happening in the nation of Israel. It was an object lesson of what was happening in the temple of God. And so Jesus curses the fig tree because it's not producing any fruit. He then goes directly into the temple and he cleanses the temple. He drives out people with a whip. How's that for meek and mild Jesus, who never steps on anybody's toes? Jesus drives people out with a whip because he says they had turned his father's house into a den of robbers, into a den of thieves. It was to be a house of prayer, and they had made it a house of making money. Come Tuesday, he's back in the temple, but this time he's teaching. He's giving parables. And the Sadducees come to him and they ask him a question about the resurrection. They're trying to trick him, but you can't trick Jesus. And in Jesus' answer to them, he says, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. He is answering in the affirmative that there is the resurrection. There is life after death, and he is about to prove it at the end of this week. The next day of the week is Wednesday. And it's known as Spy Wednesday, because this is the day that Judas decided to betray Jesus. Mark 14 gives us the detail that there was a woman who came to Jesus and she brought an alabaster box, a flask that had ointment in it. And it would have been very expensive. And she took it and she poured it out over Jesus. And the disciples said that it was a waste, but Jesus said, "She anointed me for burial." Jesus even there was proclaiming, prophesying that he was about to die and be buried. But the disciples didn't understand it and they didn't like it, especially Judas, because it's directly after that it says that Judas went to the Jewish authorities and he betrayed Jesus. Thursday is known as Maundy Thursday. Maundy is a Latin word that means commandment. It is this day that Jesus said, "I give you a new commandment, that you are to love one another even as I have loved you." It is by loving one another that people will recognize that you are my disciples. So it's called Maundy Thursday because Jesus gives this commandment at the Last Supper. It's here at the Last Supper that Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper. He takes bread and he takes wine and he says, "Eat this and drink this and do it in remembrance of me." After they're finished, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane means crushing. Jesus goes to a place of crushing. It's at Gethsemane that he is praying and he says, "Father, not my will be done, but your will be done." There was once a man named Adam who was disobedient in a garden and brought sin and death into the world. Well, now you have the new Adam, the greater Adam, the perfect man, Jesus Christ, being obedient even to the point of death in a garden. And by doing so, he conquers death, he overcomes sin, and he redeems humanity. It's at the Garden of Gethsemane that Judas comes and betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Jesus is brought that night to the Jewish council. He's brought before Caiaphas, who was the high priest, and he's falsely accused and he's falsely condemned. Going into the next morning, which would be Friday morning. Friday is Good Friday. And it may seem odd that it's Good Friday because this is the day that Jesus is sentenced to be crucified and the day that that crucifixion is carried out. They take Jesus to Pilate, the Roman authorities, and they take him to Herod, another Jewish authority. And before both of them, Jesus remains silent. He doesn't even speak. He doesn't even defend himself. Well, we read in Isaiah 53 that he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Jesus was silent because he knew what needed to be done, and he was ready to willingly lay down his life. He was then tried and sentenced to be crucified. They took him and they beat him with a rod. They flogged him until he was not even recognizable. Isaiah 52 talks about this suffering servant, which obviously points to Jesus, saying that he would be so marred that he would be beyond human resemblance. After beating him, they hung him on a cross. They put a crown of thorns on his head. There was a thief on either side. One of the thieves honored him and repented. The other thief mocked him and had his eyes plucked out. Jesus on the cross, he quoted Psalm 22 and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He said, "I thirst." He said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and he yielded up his spirit. You see, Jesus willingly laid down his life. He willingly gave himself up, and he willingly yielded up his spirit. He was in control the entire time, and Jesus died on Good Friday. Saturday was a dark day because Jesus' body lay in the tomb. So it's not only referred to as Holy Saturday, it's also referred to as Black Saturday. God, after his work of creation, he rested on the Sabbath. Well, here, God, after his work of redemption, his body lay resting on the Sabbath day. But Sunday morning is the best day of all, because it was Sunday that Jesus rose from the dead. The women that followed him went to the tomb, and his body wasn't there because he was no longer dead. There was an angel, a messenger sent from God, and he said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, for he is risen." What makes Christianity true is that Jesus is alive. Prayers are answered because he is alive. Lives are changed because he is alive. Souls are saved because he is alive. There's nothing dead about Jesus, so there's nothing dead about Christianity.